Okay, so we're recording. What I'll do, I mean, you're familiar with my kind of interview format. I'm not sure. I'll probably put it out under that branding, or I might just do a sort of standalone thing. But regardless, what I'll do at the start is do a little bit of scene setting from, particularly from my perspective, in terms of kind of saying a little bit about sort of how, I mean, obviously it's a national story, it's a tragic story. Obviously, obviously you're going to say whatever you're going to say. From my perspective, kind of one of the reasons I was immediately drawn to it and sort of what want to cover it is because it says something about the kind of gendered violence narrative that we are constantly pointing at. That sort of that it's dangerous to keep pushing that narrative because little boys and little girls like this child, kind of are the ones that ultimately end up suffering. So. I'll keep it short and brief, but basically, I'm ready to listen to whatever you want to say, and I'll just kind of pop up whenever it seems appropriate.
Whenever it suits. When I heard about this last week, I went into, I think, a sort of suspended animation for a few days.
Yeah.
In total disbelief. And when my brain started to function again, I suddenly remember I wrote about this in the book, The War on Dads and Children. I wrote a chapter about Daniel Pelka, who was from Coventry, next door to Solihull, and under the same West Midlands umbrella group as regards social services and that. And it has so many parallels. It was absolutely sickening. Just to recap, Daniel Pelka was a lovely blonde, blue-eyed boy, a bit like Peter Connolly and Haringey, Baby P, and a bit like poor, unfortunate, they're all unfortunate children, Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. Now, ultimately, the responsibility for the deaths of those innocent children is the parents who committed the murders. But a major part of responsibility is in the local services. And a major part of that is cultural. Because, for example, in Solihull, the West Midlands, in July, 1 month after Arthur was killed, the Department of Home Office and the Department for Transport announced the West Midlands Combined Authority, which is the area responsible for Solihull and Coventry, the CEO, Laura Schoaf, and West Midlands Interim MD, will be violence against women and girls transport champions for all of the UK. In October 21, the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner, in charge of Coventry and Solihull services, secured more than £500,000 to tackle violence against women and girls. When the most recent death for years had been a boy, and the previous death in similar circumstances was also a boy in 2012 and 2013. In 2013, the unfortunate Daniel Pelka, starving little boy in school, robbing bins and lunch boxes. The local school secured the bins for her. It's difficult to comprehend. I find it difficult to comprehend. I'm a school governor for many years, my parent for more years than that. I simply can't understand how humans can have such a cultural mindset to not look at what causes this to happen. Now, if I link that to the two boroughs, particularly Brent, that I'm so familiar with, in the briefing on Daniel Pelka, which the Chief Inspector of Offset, Sir Michael Wilshaw, had ordered in October 2013, and I quote, he said that most local children's safeguarding boards are not worthy of the name because they are meant to coordinate all these authorities, that are all meant to link up their information on red flag serious incidents, which of course is very proper if it's done. And at the Brent briefing on Daniel Pelka in 2013, December, it quickly descended into a diatribe about how violent men are and how many women suffer, And did we know that Daniel Pelka's mother was a victim of domestic violence? She secured an injunction against the biological father of the child, who, when he went to see the child, and yet again attempted to see the child, she threatened with a large 14-inch kitchen knife. He pushed her hand one side and slapped her wrist, and she got an injunction on the basis of that. And instead of describing to us the need for improved systems, all it was, do you know that 1 in 3 women, which is a bogus report in the first place, but leaving that aside. Haringey, with regard to baby TP Daniel Peter Connolly, prior to that was along with Brent over baby Victoria Columbia. There was a Lord Lehman inquiry, which cost, I forget how many, I think it was 75 million at the time. 4 acts of parliament were passed. 109 recommendations were made. 8 years later, incidentally, in the Lord Lehman inquiry, which I didn't read until 2010, the casual manner in which Brent and Haringey and NSPCC lied, mislaid papers, documents, etc., to a government-backed parliamentary inquiry was absolutely shocking. So this is the culture we have in these organizations, that basically they do what they want. And they keep saying, we want more. And the regulators are from the same mindset. Now, we turn to the present. Arthur Labinjo-Hughes, rest in peace, because he had no peace 3 years of his life. But he had peace for the first 3 years of his life, relative peace, because he was living with his father, Thomas Hughes, and his biological mother. And around them was surrounded by good family on both sides, child-centered people, from what I can determine. And they split up, the biological parents, and he was living with his mother, and he had good contact with his father for a year, and that all is fine on the surface. In reality, she had stabbed her on-off boyfriend 3 months before she stabbed him to death. Arthur was present when she stabbed him 3 months previously, but like a lot of men in this situation, he wouldn't press charges. So that happened. Then, in a drink and drug-fueled rage, she stabbed him to death, and the police body cameras showed her stepping over him as if he was a bit of dirt on a tile or something. A total lack of empathy. Then Thomas Hughes, Arthur's father, went to live with his parents, and the child had a year of comfort, and probably the best year of his life, with good grandparents looking after him. And then Thomas met this lady, Emma Tustin, who had a lengthy history with social services, and was brilliant at knowing how to answer and how to coach the children in advance. And Thomas and his father was moved in to her house, and then lockdown came along. And immediately she decided she didn't like this unwanted child in her house, and that she feared that his biological mother would get out of prison at some stage, and he would go back to her. Which if it happens, it happens. Actually sentenced to 11 years, she's going to be serving 5.5 or 6 anyway. What anybody, particularly me and others, find incomprehensible is it wasn't even the dignity of a quick death. It is a slow, torturous, long-term, steady ratcheting death. The child was 6. The family on both sides were very concerned. They didn't believe what they were told. They repeatedly contacted the police and social services. His grandmother took photographs of about 3 square inches of bruising just below his left shoulder and sent it to social services. She is a teacher, his grandmother, not a person of limited articulacy or anything like that. And social services visited the next day. 2 social workers found a boisterous, happy child. Well, of course, yes, he'd been coached, well prepared, right? The police, when his uncle, his paternal uncle, Derek Hughes, I think his name is Daniel, repeatedly tried to get the police to go around to check that the child was okay. because I presume they had information from neighbours or something. Reading between the lines, they had reasons for concern, and they were pushing it further than a lot of people would. I mean, after all, who with a brother or sister you don't see for a few months worries about their children, their nieces and their nephews? It's not an issue. It was an issue for this family on both sides. And he, Daniel Hughes, was threatened by a police officer with breach of COVID regulations if he went to see Arthur on his own. Now, that police officer should be suspended and sacked following an inquiry. But that is not all. That is not particularly what annoys me. It is the entire culture in these agencies. I am confident, because I've looked up the domestic violence strategy in Solihull, and you'll be so surprised to hear it is heavily VAWG, violence against women and girls, focused. In fact, once you cut away the few sentences of convenience where they give lip service that some men experience domestic abuse, but it's much less than 20%. Yet the Office of National Statistics completely contradicts that. The West Midlands, Solihull included, post-LASPO, legal aid sentencing and punishment of offenders, 2013, are one of the highest increases for non-molestation ex parte injunctions against fathers, 82%. How much of the service's time, social workers, domestic violence agencies, and police were involved in this farrago, where between 75% and 88% of allegations in the family courts are either false, knowingly false, or unknowingly false. That is Strathclyde University, and also from an Australian university. That's in Australia now, it's 88%. It's higher down there, that percentage.
We'll pull those links, or we'll pull that out, and I'll include links.
Yes, yes. Professor Tommy Mackay is the gentleman in the Strathclyde University. They came up with 75%, I believe, about 4 years ago.
Okay.
If you go into those police stations, like the one in Wembley, there are about 12 posters in the reception area of Wembley Police Station advertising Advance, BDVAP, the Domestic Violence Advocacy Project, which is a section of Women's Aid. So I'm confident you have the same situation in Solihull. I haven't been into Solihull Police Station, but I'm confident you have the same amount of posters and what have you. So if a man, for example, is a victim of domestic abuse from his female partner, he goes into that police station. It's almost the cultural equivalent of a black man going to the local KKK in the 1930s and asking for help with discrimination against his civic rights. It is as blatant as that. But that is not what sickens me. What really sickens me is that a slight majority of parents who kill children are mothers. Yeah. Women and girls are less victims of crime than men and boys. Yet, the entire narrative is the epidemic of violence against women and girls. The extraordinary funding, the control of the narrative, the agencies accept it without question. Now, if I may just finish this bit of a monologue.
Okay.
Brent recently announced 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. A couple of weeks ago, a local councillor, Asbal, in the local paper wrote, and I quote, because I took them to task over it. I quote his sentence: "We all know that when England lose at football, domestic violence rises 38%, and when England lose, it rises 38%, and when they win, it rises 26%. Now, he didn't say what happens if they draw. Let's joke.
Yeah.
And this is under the headline, Men Must Change.
Yeah.
Now, this is the most spurious evidence imaginable, because I know where it comes from. It's in America, and it's hopelessly propagandist. I went to the 2-hour open event organized by Brent on this epidemic of violence against women and girls. And I felt like the black man in the brilliant Mel Brooks classic Western comedy, Blazing Saddles. Yeah. It was a festival of bigotry. Among the most ridiculous statements I heard was from the usual little outdated um, or misogynist, not a misogynist, worse than that, a chauvinist, small councillor man, stating that women should be escorted across a footbridge from the tube stations and not allowed to go on their own.
Sure, that went on.
The evidence to support this was significant by absence. But this is the mindset you have. It puts women back to a pre-Victorian, little helpless. It is absolutely incredible. And all the agencies, at the very beginning, we were told by the chair that we must not say anything which counters the narrative or hurts female victims of an open event.
Yeah. Let me say a few things, because obviously we both felt kind of very strongly about the need to have this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the little Arthur story does absolutely, as previous stories, and indeed actually I just came across one today, a little boy who survived. He was featured at a kind of event with the royals, Prince William and Kate Middleton. Kind of met him at a Christmas carol.
Yes, I remember something. Yes.
Yeah, little Tony had to have both legs amputated.
Oh my God, he's raising money. What a heroic little fellow.
Yeah, horrendous.
You wouldn't, if it happened to animals, there'd be a total outcry.
Yeah.
Yes,
and so
that is a sickening one.
One of the things kind of I'm conscious about, you know, even having this conversation, and I felt the same when I covered a story about Phoenix, a young lady who was kind of brutally murdered, body chopped up, burnt, and, you know, kind of hidden in suitcases and thrown into the woods, kind of thing.
No. Yes.
It was significant for a number of reasons, particularly Jess Phillips didn't include her in the list of all the women.
Now you are speaking about the archbigot herself.
Indeed.
Because in case you don't know, she is a former director of Women's Aid in the West Midlands.
Business development manager.
Yes, business development manager.
Couldn't be more apt on that point.
Yeah.
Let me say this though. So basically, she did Phoenix Nets. I'm sorry, that was her name. She did initially tweet about her because she was murdered in a women's refuge, and the initial rumor,
not the only child murdered in a women's refuge, I might add.
No. But yeah, the initial rumor was that it was a man, and that this, you know, so this sort of very much helped with the narrative that.
Of course, yeah, male monster, men must change.
So Jess Phillips tweeted about that, and then she removed her tweets when it became clear that it was actually a woman.
One can only laugh at such rank hypocrisy and arrogance.
It is, but kind of
I'll cry.
The reason I particularly mention her in this context is I felt kind of difficult telling her story. I thought it was important that somebody told her story.
Yes.
And in the context of why champions of women were forgetting her, you know, hiding her. And I was conscious that sort of, you know, obviously my perspective and your perspective is particularly looking at the likes of fathers' rights, about imbalance in terms of services in the domestic violence sphere, etc. And
the child's rights ultimately, and the fathers to exercise the responsibilities on behalf of the child.
And that's it. So, you know, kind of, I thought that sort of the feminists movement very much exploited the, you know, tragic murder of Sarah Everard recently.
They did indeed. Yes.
And I don't want to be remotely seen to be doing anything similar in terms of kind of little Arthur's death.
Same here.
But the reason we want to speak about this is because this is at the heart of why we do what we do. Because this is about children, ultimately. One of the shocking things I discovered recently, so little Arthur's 6, little Tony is 7, little Arthur, was 6. God bless his. God rest his soul. I discovered in a Women's Aid annual report, no less, so official statistics from Women's Aid, there are women's refuges in England that turn boys away.
That's great.
As young as 8.
And 9 was my previous figure, but 8 I'm not surprised with.
Yeah. Solely because they're male.
Yeah.
And the kind of I did a big presentation last year about the domestic violence helpline, and one of the things I pointed to in it was there was a finding by social services. I think it might have been in Nottingham, I can't remember. About it was a young child. Well, it wasn't gendered. Could have been a little boy. Could have been a little girl. A young infant, in fact, who fortunately wasn't killed, but was brutally abused and, no doubt traumatized for life. And the review in terms of the gaps and how things were missed and how social workers missed, the key finding coming out of that was it must be gender neutral in terms of the training that it provided to professionals. Because if people aren't looking at the mother in the same way that they're looking at the father, and it's, and the point is with little Arthur's story, I blame the father at most. He
totally failed his biological duty and responsibility, and I'm only disappointed he didn't get the same 29 years as his stepmother did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's a great responsibility for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a great responsibility, and I know he may be under her spell. Let's be kind to him. He doesn't deserve it, but he encouraged, aided, abetted, supported this. Yeah. So I'm disappointed he didn't get the extra 8 years.
Personally, I would agree. And the same goes with the story of little Tony's experience. I know very little about it other than that article. But both biological parents were blamed and imprisoned.
Just to assist you further on the narrative and the lack of gender neutrality, which is absolutely necessary if there's ever going to be impartial professionalism and better outcomes for children. Yeah, I'm not one of the take them into care if there's any risk, because that is much worse situation. Yeah, by and large. But where there is proven risk, that's a different matter. Women's Aid a few years ago ran a narrative on how dangerous it was and how horrible it was that the family courts were giving fathers access to children to kill the children. And it came up with 19 child homicides, carefully chosen over, I think it was 9 years.
Yeah, roughly.
Maybe 10 years. 10 years. And that got a lot of headlines. And a lot of people from the system.
A lot of coverage in Parliament as well.
That's right. Yes. Well, with the usual vigilantes, of course. Yeah. And the brilliant William Collins did research into this on serious case reviews and coroner's reports, and discovered that in that same length of time, 332 children were killed, and a slight majority were killed by the mothers. Yeah. And this was not mentioned. This got virtually no airtime that I can recall. But most sickening of all, 2 children were killed by one mother in a Women's Aid refuge.
That's right. Yeah.
And when the police turned up, she told them, I wanted him to feel pain.
Yeah.
One of the children she killed wasn't even that man's child. She had 3 children by 3 fathers, but he took that child as his own and looked after it.
Yeah.
But that was deliberately omitted while they were portraying the fantasy that only men kill children.
Yeah. And that is the reality that so many, and this is the thing that disgusts me the most, or frightens me the most almost, that, so many people at the coalface, or, professional people.
I would use the word P only, not large P, professional, small P.
Well, people with influence and gatekeepers,
yes.
Kind of, instinctually will know that kind of, these things are not as simple. There's worldwide research to show that the most common form of abuse, of domestic abuse, is bidirectional. So it's dysfunctional
Yes.
relationships where both
But
partners.
that doesn't suit a gendered narrative.
Yeah.
And what's worse for the gendered narrative is that could then lead to a reduction in their income.
And that's the thing, kind of, and that's obviously, that's probably the key thing we're looking to talk about in this context, because it's kind of, like there's this great saying, you can't poison half a well.
Yes.
And the well is child protection.
Yeah, absolutely. And humanity. Yeah.
And it disgusts me. And it strikes me, I mean, Aaron Pusey kind of made the point that the CEO of Refuge, which is...
That's right, Sandra Hurley.
Yeah, Sandra Hurley, or well...
Yeah.
Largest refuge provider in England and Wales, was paid more than the Prime Minister.
Well over the Prime Minister's wage, yeah.
And whenever you look at sort of the silencing impact that this narrative achieves across the board,
that's right.
Social workers who are at the coalface, and I know social workers, senior social
I know
workers,
several of them, and I know ex-social workers
who know.
Some of the most child-focused people I know who left the industry, including Kafka's Children's Family Court Advisor Support Service.
Yeah.
And some of them, but when they're in the system, they're line managed. There's no independence, no impartiality. What I want to demonstrate is that there has, prior to Lord Laming, I believe there were 75 or 79 major investigations into child protection in this country. Lord Laming made 109 recommendations over Victoria Columbia and the service inadequacies in Brent and in Haringey, 2 boroughs, with responsibilities for that child. And when baby P, Peter Connolly, met his tragic death years later at the hands of a brutal stepfather this time, he was asked to do a review. And what's the most shocking thing he had to say? None of his recommendations had been followed. But in Haringey, before baby P was so horribly murdered, a social worker called Nevres Kamal had tried to whistleblow. Not just about the culture, she was not about the culture, because she's part of the culture, I presume, but about the junkets, the time wasting, the trips abroad for learning. Oh yeah. What happened to her when someone from the inside tries to blow the whistle? Suddenly her care of her 4 children was a matter of concern for the local social services.
Yeah. And that,
that is total.
Yeah.
Nobody is going to, now, she was later given compensation. Long afterwards. The person in charge of Haringey Social Services wasn't even a social worker. She was actually from her own province, a teacher, Sharon Shoesmith. I don't know how at fault she was, because usually the system, when something goes tragically wrong, will find a scapegoat of convenience. And that's it. It is jettisoned. I've had 2 parliamentary ombudsman investigations into Kafka's Children and Family Court Advisory Support Service. But I've had the greater privilege of, a few years ago, listening to a former High Court judge, I cannot say who, obviously, and his anger. He was the judge when he was much junior in 1988-89, responsible for the S going into Kafka's support services. And funding was ring-fenced to support parents who had difficulties. Because some parents, humans, do have difficulties. Gambling issues, drug issues, mild personality issues, mental issues that can be dealt with a bit of counseling and assistance. And this is what this money was ring-fenced for. But it quickly became hijacked. And for example, even Kafka's, the court advisors, the most sacred duty you can have is advising courts on children's welfare. Their domestic violence provider is for male-only perpetrators.
Yeah.
I mean, I was totally gobsmacked when I first came across that. I had to double check it because I thought that's false information. Until I realized the lovely language they use, because they were saying that they provide services for both male and females. Then I realized, you see, when I dug further, they provide service for female survivors.
Yeah. And
they provide service for male perpetrators. But of course, the public don't ask that.
Yeah.
Now, at this violence against women and girls in Brent, this festival, A couple of days later, I was on a panel, MOPAC, Mayor's Office, Police and Crime, because I'm a Brent panel member. And I brought up this issue about funding of services and impartial professionalism. And Brent officers absolutely insisted that there's a service provided, but they wouldn't answer the question, is there an equal service provided? Yeah. Oh, no. that question doesn't get answered, because I know from freedom of information that it is not. Yeah. But yet, you have a situation where, for example, they processed me for kicking and killing a non-existent family dog, right? Wow, shadows to the rescue. And Kafka insisted that 2 paragraphs of evidence was a typing error, and that I go on their DVIP program, Domestic Violence Intervention Project, because I quote, one of the most absurd sentences I've ever heard in my life, and I like comedy, was that the professionals in Brent have deemed me to be violent. Unregulated, unaccountable, with one narrative. Now, is that any different than the professionals in Solihull? No, I guarantee you it's not. It's the same bandwagon. It's a large bandwagon. And it's extraordinarily assisted. And while that continues, the situation becomes much, much worse. But it is not worse for everyone. This is the sickening thing about it. It is worse for children. It is worse for usually fathers, who are about 90% of the non-resident parent. And it's worse for society. It is worse for society because of the huge cost to society in the amount of people from split homes, from difficult backgrounds, who are the high percentage of the, how would you call it, the net millionaires to society in the cost of the social services, to the agencies, to the mental health agencies, to the prisons. There's a huge amount of income by many professionals with many letters after their name, earn a living in here. And as an example, Erin Pitsey once remarked, or often has told, that the founder of Refuge, I might add, the founder of Refuge, who was quickly blacklisted when the militant, as she calls them, the Marxist feminists took over, as opposed to feminists who want equality of opportunity, which I entirely support. As former house husband, I obviously supported it. A prison governor saying to her that for every child from a dysfunctional family, ask an extra point on my pension. So you see, there's no desire to attack the causes of the crime. There's a huge desire to benefit from the crime, from the situation, from the mess. And as an Austrian female MEP said to me in the European Parliament in 2014, when I got there, about its motion on systemic failings in the UK family court system, after looking through the evidence, she said, and only a person who doesn't speak English as a first language with a real brain can sometimes cut out the jargon and just hit the nail on the head. She said, it is obvious that in the UK, the welfare of the child means the welfare of the professional at the expense of the child. That comment floored me. And I guarantee you that post this government-funded inquiry into the serious case review about Labinjo-Hughes would be no different in outcome than the one into Daniel Pelka, BBP, Victoria Clomby, or anyone else. Yeah. What we'll say is that there were failings in the system. There'll be myriad amount of excuses why there were failings in the system. It's always they are overworked, they are underfunded. Strange how they're always underfunded. All right. Coventry, for example, after Daniel Pelka, was awarded an extra £5.6 million to improve its services. How can you improve a service when it's totally bigoted in the first place in service provision for the benefit of children and society? Now, people will say that some men, perhaps, will make false accusations against the resident's mother to cause problems. Well, fine. There's courts to deal with that. Yeah. There's lots of legislation for dealing with harassment and malicious allegations and all the rest. Large industry there. But establish whether the child is safe, first of all, and then if the allegation is false, okay, deal with the person who makes the false allegation that disrupts the child's parenting. But when you have a narrative of only one side can be bad and only one side can be good, how in the 21st century did the UK end up with such a bigoted mindset where the most vulnerable of all are suffering the most from it, children? Well, we now have a figure allegedly 1 in 6 children with mental health issues. It was 1 in 8 for a few years there.
Well, that's the thing. Kind of, presumably this inquiry will also put some sort of excuse in terms of the kind of the withdrawal of services because of lockdown, etc. I don't necessarily want to kind of broaden the discussion in that direction, but in both the cases of Sarah Everard and little Arthur, there are very strong arguments to point to the possibility that they could very well still be alive if the government hadn't gone down the route of lockdown and their.
Well, everything in life has consequences, usually unintended. And without getting into the whole lockdown, no vax, pro vax argument, for the record, I'm double jabbed myself.
Yeah.
But when you had like the Wayne Couzens, I believe, was that evil individual, I'll be very polite, name. He would have done a murder at some stage.
Yeah.
But the problem was, prior to that, he had been exposing himself in fish and chip shops and the like, and getting away with it, apparently, according to staff, people that put in complaints about him. It was ignored.
Like it, yeah.
So you see, you had a system failure there. Perhaps you had a bit of the old boys network or the canteen culture. We don't know. But if you look at Arthur Hughes, right? The course that he was on meant that he was probably going to be either seriously injured or killed anyway, because that was the wish of the two people looking after him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, the main point.
And school. I'm sorry, Brian, but school holidays in the summer are 42 days.
Yeah.
That's a long time with no teacher seeing them.
No, absolutely. The kind of main point I'm making is that in the same way that, kind of lockdown is probably more to blame in terms of contributing to that situation. In the review, it will likely be used as, well, these were mitigating factors.
Used. It will be magnified.
Yeah. And in the same way that some of the failings of the system that moving away from lockdown, the failing of the system in terms of the people let them down, reviews very often will turn that around, defend themselves.
Well, as I just say in my simple language, the system protects the system. Rule number 1. And bear in mind, in similar previous horror cases of the children we've mentioned, no social workers were sacked, no police officers were sacked, no teachers were sacked, they weren't reprimanded, they weren't suspended. So who will benefit from this review? How much will it cost? I've no doubt it'll come up with a report that's beautifully written.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that for a second. And then what is the outcome later on? Steady as it goes. There'll be a slight rise in care applications for a while, no doubt in that area, because they want to protect themselves first of all, which may lead to actually further abuse. But will they change the VAWG policy in Solihull? No. So when you have a policy that VOG is the dominant narrative, and half of children, I don't so much mind half of men, because they're adults, they can fight for themselves. Most of them are pretty useless at that as well. But half of children are deliberately excluded against in legislation, in narrative, or in the culture, in the implementation, interpretation. It may as well be legislation. That won't be changed.
To put in context, I mean, two of the primary reasons that certainly I'm motivated to do what I do is, first of all, I'm not 100% sure if the crimes that will have been recorded in Arthur's case fall within the purview of VWAG, violence against women and girls. It's very likely that they do, or some of them will. And in that case, he will be recorded as a girl. And
well, to add to that,
let me just make the other point. And the other reason I do what I do is because 50% of the child population, roughly, are girls.
Yeah, I think it's 51%, but I'm not going to argue.
Sure, yeah. But they are, in my opinion, let down just as much because...
Oh, absolutely.
So many girls in violent houses where it's either both parents or it's
Yeah.
the mother.
Yes.
And no one wants
Nobody.
to talk about it.
Nobody wants to know, by and large. On the point you've just made, that Arthur's death may end up being a statistic, but probably not because of the same reason Jess Phillips deleted her tweet. That one doesn't suit. That would be left one side. In September 2016, 7th of September, in the editorial of The Guardian, journalist Ali Fogg asked the question of why the Crown Prosecution Service, under Alison Saunders, recording violence against boys and men under violence against women and girls. Well, of course, the answer is very simple. Number one, it embellished the figures. Two, figures embellished got extra funding. I mean, it's a beautiful system. But this is something I want to ask you. You're much more knowledge on this than me. Brent insists that less than 20% of violence, domestic violence, is against men. So does Sally Hull and its domestic violence, many pages. Is this 20% a cut-off figure where they can discriminate in service provision or something? Is it an official cut-off figure? I'm curious about that, how they both use the figure 20%, which is contradictory of the national statistics.
I don't know. I mean, it's very possible.
But it's surprising how they both go for the less than 20%. Why pick that figure?
I mean, they're probably pointing to something, possibly, you know, as data. I mean, I certainly know, you know, the likes of Vera Baird, the victims commissioner, has always pointed
make misogyny a hate crime.
Yes. She's always pointed to 10% because I think
it's lower with her, yeah.
Yeah, that's getting into the kind of, I think, the prosecution percentages. You know, so it's essentially, it's not, you know, there's no victim unless there's an actual, you know, court case and prosecution. So as you know, kind of, you know, the system is stacked in the sense that if the courts and the police and the social workers and etc. are trained to look at domestic violence
one direction
in a certain way and in one direction, if you only have perpetrator, you know, because, well, to the best of my knowledge, Deborah Parney's a good person to talk to about this one.
She's awesome.
Yeah, there's very little kind of positive evaluation outputs in terms of kind of the effectiveness of perpetrator programs. But
well, Ellen Pence, one of the founders of Duluth, Respect.
No, Duluth, Ellen Pence.
Duluth, yeah. That pantomime from that coal port in Minnesota has completely taken apart its gendered narrative later on and demonstrated that it was no good. But it has been absolutely hijacked to such an extent that Kafka's, the family court advisors, use only Respect accredited model of DVIP, DAPP, DVPP. Because what to do is, you see, like all, as I call them, those with criminal enterprise, almost, they change the acronym every few years, the abbreviation. I mean, for example, when I had over a number of years, my 2 parliamentary ombudsman investigations against Kafka's, every 2 years, the headlines change.
Yeah.
So you end up in this carousal that your complaint is no longer valid because it's under a previous system. Now they have a new system. It's the emperor's invisible clothes is all it is.
Yeah.
Incidentally, mine span 3 of these imaginary self-protectionist methods. That's all it is. But how do you think, Brian? I mean, you're doing your best. I'm doing my best. There's a few others doing their best. A few absolute standouts, male and female. How can we ever get the UK, because I committed this through a phantom dog, how can we ever get the UK to replicate, to go halfway towards established good practice in so many other first world nations that have not got this gendered narrative, that do not have near as much cost to society of children being killed, of children ending up with mental health issues, of those children ending up in the prison system. The UK is the highest amount of incarceration of any Western nation apart from America, leave aside China and a few other funny nations. So how can we get it towards that mindset of improved practice from gender neutral impartial professionalism, as opposed to what I call the current child endangering gender discrimination, which is all that VAG and the like is child endangering gender discrimination. And I'm certainly not saying there's no violent men. Of course there's violent men. There's disgusting examples of men, a few. There's disgusting examples of women, a few. The vast majority of quality people under normal circumstances. So the push has to be to replicate good practice from developed nations who have far less of these problems, far less cost, and far more benefit for children and society.
I'll give you two answers.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll probably give you three actually. Hold the line is the first point, because I think the problem is that if you look at, for example, the Istanbul Convention, which
it's just Jim Crow law. It's just a Jim Crow law.
It's slightly in retreat, but sort of it very much follows the template of the English model of violence against women and girls. So I think it's a twofold kind of battle here, because it's important to hold the line so that the rest of the world doesn't end up kind of going down the gender route. In terms of the 19 homicides report that you mentioned, I think it's useful to kind of mention that in this context, because the difference between, in my opinion, the difference between Women's Aid and William Collins in terms of their research approach was one, obviously William Collins was extremely thorough and included all of the data, not just the data that fitted
selective.
The narrative. And whilst the Women's Aid narrative did very much kind of present I'm not sure if smear is the right word, but presented fathers as the danger,
purely
the danger issue. William Collins had the decency to point out that whilst mothers in that research were found to have killed children more so than biological fathers and partners combined.
So what higher?
That does not mean that the vast majority of mothers are not good mothers.
Well, they're excellent. The vast majority. I don't question that for a second.
Yeah, these are the exception. So that's the kind of one of the points I kind of want to make, that sort of a big danger with the VAG approach is it just demonizes, and in doing so it endangers children. And in answer to your question though, one of the things I would like to see, and I know that there are a few people kind of working on a project at the minute, which will kind of come to fruition in the new year. One of the things I would like to see is more of a focus in terms of what's happening in Northern Ireland at the minute, because Northern Ireland doesn't have a violence against women and girls strategy.
Oh, but there's pressure to bring one in.
And there's pressure to bring one in.
Of course. Bring it in line with the other developed nations in the UK. Oh, yeah.
And it's quite a unique narrative, and it's quite a unique situation, because the thing that strikes me about this, it kind of, as I've kind of come to learn about it, it's always struck me as kind of, surely at some point this bubble must burst. And I look at sort of someone like Jess Phillips, for example, who's a great example of kind of, whatever you think of Jess Phillips,
if I can come in here.
Okay, go on.
Jess Phillips is not the most dangerous anti-man arch feminist, because I'm not going to use the word feminist about these people. They're a perversion of feminism, because all they want is supremacy, gender supremacy. Yeah. They do not want equality of opportunity. No way. She is not the most dangerous in Parliament. And they're all virtually in the Labour lot, of course, as we know. There's several others who are more dangerous but keep a lower profile.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are in the legal profession, which completely dominates the family courts arena. And while the family courts work hand in glove with unregulated, unaccountable gender vigilantes of domestic violence agencies, unaccountable, unregulated, there's no hope for real professional impartiality there. That link has to be severed. You only get official organizations in any country working with what I call paramilitaries to do its dirty work in broken societies. You don't get it in developed proper societies. Once again, when I was in Brussels on its motion in 2014 and having this dialogue with a few female MEPs, 4 of them. Among the expressions they came up with was, and all of them were called themselves feminists, but they considered it a whole modern thing. They could understand, here's some of the sentences I heard, that Britain is stuck in a 1970s toxic time warp. That regarding children, it's draconian, it's barbaric.
Well,
they look upon it with horror. We have to get more people to look upon it with horror to bring about improvement and change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of the point I kind of really wanted to make about Jess Phillips, because absolutely, I've utterly no doubt that there are, you know, kind of much more dangerous people in this, you know, space. The, you know, I suppose the point is that sort of, if you look at what people are prepared to say in public and very proudly, that says something about what people are likely to be saying in private.
Oh, absolutely.
And the thing that kind of strikes me particularly, and the reason Jess Phillips jumped to mind, is because with the domestic abuse legislation that's been kind of rattling through Parliament, she's spearheaded a campaign which has been significant in 2 points, and it always strikes me. I keep pointing to Jess Phillips because there's so much contradiction in her words.
Mm-hmm.
So the campaign was called "No Victim Left Behind."
That's right. A wonderful expression.
Yeah, absolutely. And a very big part of that campaign was the emphasis on children, because the view is that children have not been considered, enough in this conversation about domestic violence. And she stood up in Parliament one time, and you know, she's very good at making the impassioned speech. And you know, some people buy it, some people buy it, and some people want to buy it. Indeed, but you know, her point was that she was saying that the only qualification for getting help for domestic violence is the question, "Are you human?" Okay.
Yeah.
And my point would be that someone like Jess Phillips, I believe, genuinely believes that what she's saying, and essentially that she genuinely doesn't believe that there are more than 5-10% of men in that category, which is why it is complete. I wouldn't be surprised if secretly she believes that essentially only women can be victims of domestic violence. But that's
well, for example, coming back to the Brent VAWG party.
Yeah.
A former probation officer of over 20 years and now a councillor who was co-chairing effectively of this festival of bigotry, I call it, stated that in her experience, all the women in prison for domestic abuse, and for a woman to go to prison for domestic abuse, is pretty serious.
Yeah.
Because they're far less likely to go to prison than men are for any crime, let alone domestic abuse. That 70, 80, 90% of them had previously been abused, and this was just retaliation on their part.
Yeah.
So I presume to her, Emma Tustin, who killed Arthur Labinjo-Hughes, comes into that category.
I'm sure some have already argued that. And there will be, with the greatest respect to sort of everybody involved in this, there will be absolutely truth in part of that narrative, because, the vast majority of people that end up in prison, and obviously most of them are men, will have come from disadvantaged situations, will have come from abuse. It's very well known.
It's a cash crop for an awful lot of the so-called professionals who are one step away from being working class and who are determined to dump on the working class, as far as I can see. That's my layman's perspective on it.
But to bring it back around to sort of solutions, that's the thing that keeps striking me, and that's the kind of point I really was trying to get to with Jess Phillips is I struggle to find that surely at some point this bubble must burst. That the narrative is so stacked towards we must help no victim, but really men are just.
Well, I'll tell you why I don't share your optimism.
I'm not saying I'm optimistic. I'm just saying.
Well, it's where we have to get to.
Yeah,
that's not in question. It's where we have to get to. The reason why I slightly disagree with you is this: since the beginning of time, women generally seen it as being okay to kind of control men and demand and ask things of them, because mostly men were the primary earners throughout most of history. We're larger physically and we have less hormonal complications allegedly, so we can spend more time working to provide for the family.
provider role.
That's right. That's nature, shall we call it, to a large extent. Obviously, with the changes in mechanization and workplaces and the legislation, that's changed a lot. In many regards, it's long overdue, the changes, and welcome. A lot of them are.
Absolutely.
But men have no concept of fighting women. We have never, ever been told to fight women. We have never, ever been told to demand women change. Now, men viscerally wish to protect women, the vast majority. The average man walking down the street, if he sees a man and a woman arguing, and there's been videos demonstrating this, he'll automatically want to protect the woman. Now, that's good. The problem is it's been hijacked and taken advantage of by this narrative. And they are the people who are the most obstructionist in bursting this ridiculous bubble that's so damaging to society.
Yeah, Elizabeth Hobson calls it gynocentrism 3.0, to the man.
Well, for example, that woman in her unique case, and she said this publicly, so I can repeat it.
Yeah.
She had 2 young children when she was in her 20s. She's quite a small woman, all big personality and ability. And she was depressed. No surprise of what she'd been through, postnatal depression. And I would swear personally that about 20% of all the fathers I come across where the child is under 1. If it wasn't for the agencies hijacking the mother's postnatal depression, that's the reason why they often end up coming to the clinics at family fathers and the like. But she rang several agencies looking for help. And what's the common question she was asked? Is your partner abusing you? Yeah. She says, he's not at all. I hate him. I hate everyone. But they had no concept of impartial professionalism. So the demean in her that she somehow, by looking for help, was in code a victim of domestic violence.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally think that this country severely lacks in assisting mothers with postnatal depression, particularly foreign mothers and that like, who haven't got a big network around them, haven't got a family network of the most recent immigrant population. And all they want is a bit of help. But there's no, consider this, in the family court, there's no money for therapy for children.
Yeah.
When I came across that from High Court judge, I might add, I could not comprehend how that no money, no funds for therapy for children. There's a lot of funds for professionals to do the myriad investigations, usually of a wishy-washy, one-gender nature, I might add. I've seen enough of them. I mean, that is where the targeting has to be of this systemic blindness, the glass blind spot, as you so accurately describe it, the elephant in the room. Yeah, that protective glass bubble has to be cracked and then opened.
And that's it. And kind of, one of the reasons I called it the focus of my project, it was very much kind of pointing to keep myself right, actually, professionally as well.
Yeah.
In terms of firewalls, was pointing at blatant discrimination, the extreme end of the scale that for whatever reason sort of isn't being tackled. And that's, kind of to me, the system at the minute in terms of the violence against women and girls mechanism and everything that tips it. And every now and again you get reviews, or you might even find it in this review, where there are findings pointing to, we need to understand that both men and women can be violent in the home.
Yeah, but there's not enough answer in that question.
Yeah. So it's kind of, obviously this is a pretty depressing chat. In terms of solutions, I'm heartened by the fact that I think there are more and more people kind of coming into this space, and particularly kind of academics and researchers,
and lead female academics.
Yeah,
there's a few of them making changes, even though they're subject to bomb threats and what have you.
Yeah,
you've mentioned about to be Dr. Deborah Powney, a major force in this. Also her colleagues, Dr. Liz Bates and Professor Nicola Graham Kivan, and Jan James, Chief Executive of Good Egg, things like that. Those people are absolutely crucial, and others like them, because I've known several male academics in this business who want to be in this business. Sorry, I should have corrected myself. but they don't want to because they know very well the likelihood of, oh, I remember he touched me up at the coffee shop or at the printer or whatever. And that's the whole investigation and everything else. And it doesn't matter if they're cleared, the doubt, the smoke, and that has an extraordinary crushing effect on a lot of academic curiosity. There's very few brave enough. There's not too many Dr. John Barrys and Dr. Ben Hine and the like who are willing to do proper research into this.
Well, that's it. Kind of there are. I mean, every woman I know in this space have been slandered and kind of abused as well. But it is harder to kind of push that kind of misogynistic line at them and just dismiss them kind of.
That's right.
I do think it's wholly significant that in terms of the kind of two corners of this conversation, if you like, there's a very diverse population of people on one side, increasingly pointing to statistical evidence, research, that has
facts,
metadata,
not creationism.
Metadata that has existed for decades, and on the other side, it's kind of at the most extreme, a kind of space where you wouldn't even, you literally wouldn't have a man about the place.
Well, women's aid in the Constitution years ago didn't allow any man to be in any of their refuges. Sorry, helping or being involved. Women's Aid Scotland, for example, and some guy, I can't remember his name, who had been working for years for Women's Aid in Scotland, tried to take it to appeal and surprise, lost. Because they got around it. Nobody wants to argue with the bandwagon. In our respective ways, we're doing what we can, and those that you've mentioned, that I've mentioned, I would far rather be among those people fighting for something than just going along with it doesn't concern me, I don't care, let's go with the narrative. When your eyes are open, you simply have a duty to yourself to do something, if you're true to yourself.
I guess we should kind of move to wrap up. I mean, essentially, okay, what can we do and what can people listening to this do? And
bring our work to more, our respective work from different angles, because I'm nowhere without people like you giving me advice. I'm absolutely nowhere. Bring our work to as many opportunities as possible. And I look upon it like fishing. For the very few fish in the river. But we have to catch a few legitimate fish, people of interest, people of influence, people of inquisitive mind, and a genuine desire and love for society and equality within society, and opportunity moving on for all, equal opportunity for all. So we have to go and find those people and bring them our message in different ways.
Yeah, that's all we can do. Every year it grows. Every year in Parliament, I mean, I think the all-party parliamentary group on men and boys is massively significant development this year.
That's right, hugely. And I've seen some of the work, and it's extraordinary. And what heartens me is, I'm almost 63. I look it, but I don't feel it. I've seen in my lifetime the complete destruction of the segregation that used to exist in the southern states of North America. Yeah. I've seen the collapse of the Berlin Wall, right, overnight virtually. I've seen this, the self-destruction of the Catholic Church, particularly in the Republic of Ireland, where it has such total control and is self-destructive with pure lunacy, really. Yeah. Because power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. I think Sir Thomas Aquinas said that. It's absolutely correct. And that the opposition to that was just when enough normal people decided to do something. Stop believing corrupt narratives. Stop believing gender prejudice. And looked at the whole of society and particularly protecting children, which is what I'm in it for.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, that's all we can do. So well, listen. Thank you for
Thank you even more so, Brian.
I think it is an important conversation, and sadly, it's probably one we'll.
I'm just so honoured you could give me an outlet for my anger.
Yeah.
And I deeply, deeply, deeply thank you for it. Yeah. Right, Brian. Bye-bye, and thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.